Richard Branson just shared the words no one expected to hear from the man who conquered everything. Heartbroken to share that Joan, my wife and partner for 50 years, has passed away. She was my best friend, my rock, my guiding light, my world. Think about that for a moment. This is the billionaire who crossed the Atlantic in a hot air balloon, who launched rockets into space, who built an empire spanning airlines, music, telecommunications, and hotels. The man who smiled through lawsuits, fires, hurricanes, and global pandemics without ever breaking stride. And now at 75 years old, he's brought to his knees by the one loss no fortune could prevent. But here's the twist of fate that makes this story almost unbearable. Richard had just fallen off his bike during a charity event in India. He flew 4,000 miles back to England for treatment and found himself in a hospital room just down the corridor from Joan, who was recovering from a back injury. They shared one final lunch together, laughing like teenagers who'd just found each other again. Then suddenly, she was gone. Stay with me, because this 50-year love story hides tragedies the world never knew about. And the woman behind Richard Branson, she was the invisible force that built everything. To understand what Richard Branson just lost, we have to go back to 1976, before the billions, before the fame, before Virgin became a household name. Richard was 26 years old, running Virgin Records from the Manor, a residential recording studio he'd established in Oxfordshire. One day, Joan Templeman walked into the studio's kitchen to make a cup of tea. She was a blonde-haired Scottish woman with sharp eyes and absolutely no patience for nonsense. And Richard Branson fell in love with her the moment he saw her. There was just one problem: Joan was already married. Her husband was Ronnie Leahy, a keyboard player for the rock band Nazareth. She'd been with him since she was 18 years old, married for over a decade, and she wasn't remotely impressed by the scruffy young entrepreneur who couldn't stop staring at her. But Richard Branson doesn't take no for an answer, not in business, and certainly not in love. Joan worked at an antique shop in London's Notting Hill area, not far from Portobello Road. Richard started visiting obsessively, buying random items he didn't need, old signs, vintage posters, anything to justify another conversation with her. His favorite purchase was a Danish bacon advertisement showing a pig and a hen, with the caption, "Now that's what I call music." That phrase would later inspire one of the best-selling compilation album series in history. But none of his usual antics worked on Joan. She saw right through the charm, the money, the flash. Richard later admitted he earned the nickname Tagalong because he literally followed her around, refusing to give up. "I would end up literally chasing," he wrote. "Finally, hopefully they'll give in." What Joan saw in him wasn't the businessman or the showman. She saw something underneath, a restless dreamer who needed grounding. And slowly, over months of persistence, something shifted between them. By the time Joan's marriage to Ronnie ended in 1978, she and Richard had already begun building a life together. But what happened next would test them in ways neither could have imagined. Here's where Richard Branson did something so audacious, so romantically reckless, that it would define their entire relationship. It was 1978. Virgin Records was growing, but Richard was far from wealthy. He'd heard about a private island for sale in the British Virgin Islands, 74 acres of paradise called Necker Island. The asking price? $6 million. Richard didn't have $6 million. He didn't have anything close to it. But he had an idea. He called the realtor and pretended to be a serious buyer, securing 2 plane tickets and a helicopter tour of the island. Then he called Joan and casually offered her the spare ticket, framing it as a spontaneous adventure. They flew over the Caribbean, looking down at crystal blue waters and white sand beaches. And as they circled that tiny island, Richard knew 2 things with absolute certainty. He was going to buy this place, and Joan was the woman he would spend his life with. When the realtor asked for an offer, Richard said $100,000. The man was not amused. He left them stranded on the island, furious at having his time wasted. But Richard had already won what mattered most: Joan's heart. A year later, with Virgin Records on firmer ground and no other buyers in sight, Richard went back. This time, he secured Necker Island for $180,000, a fraction of the original asking price. He spent years developing it into a private paradise, building Balinese-style villas and a great house that would become legendary among celebrities and royals. On December 20th, 1989, after more than a decade together and 2 children, Richard and Joan finally married on that very island. Their daughter Holly was there. Their son Sam was there. The same sand where Richard had made his impossible offer now witnessed the wedding that sealed their partnership forever. Years later, both Holly and Sam would marry on Necker Island too. 3 generations of Branson weddings, all on the piece of paradise Richard bought to impress a woman who wasn't easily impressed. But before any of that joy came something they rarely talked about, a tragedy that nearly destroyed them both. Before the island weddings, before the billions, before Richard Branson became a household name, there was a loss so devastating that it shaped everything that came after. In 1979, Joan was pregnant with their first child. They were young, deeply in love, building their future together, but during a trip to Inverness, Scotland, something went terribly wrong. Joan went into labor 3 months early. Their daughter, Clare Sarah Branson, was born at just 25 weeks gestation, weighing barely 1 to 2 pounds. In 1979, neonatal medicine wasn't what it is today. There were no advanced ventilators, no surfactant treatments, none of the technology that saves premature babies now. Clare was rushed to an incubator, fighting for every breath. Richard sat beside her for hours, reaching through the porthole to hold her tiny hand. He later described those days as the most agonizing of his life, watching his firstborn daughter struggle to survive, while knowing there was nothing he could do to help her. After 4 days, Clare Sarah died of respiratory failure. She never left the hospital. Richard has spoken about this loss only a handful of times over the decades. In a 2009 interview with Piers Morgan, he described the experience as horrendous. He said, "We were hoping and praying that the hospital would keep her alive, but it wasn't to be." But here's what hit hardest. Richard admitted that while he began healing when their daughter Holly was born about 2 years later in 1981, Joan's wound went deeper. "For myself, the moment Holly was born, that mending process was almost completed," he said. "I suspect for the mother, it will never be completely completed." Friends who knew them during that time described Clare's death as the one thing money and fame could never fix. One longtime family acquaintance said, "The baby's death changed everything for Richard and Joan. She was never quite the same afterwards, and it shook them to their core." Clare Sarah was buried in a communal grave at Tomnahurich Cemetery in Inverness, alongside other infants who died too soon. For nearly 20 years, the grave remained unmarked. Richard and Joan never visited publicly. The pain was simply too raw. But years later, their daughter Holly made a quiet pilgrimage to Scotland. She found her sister's resting place and arranged for a simple granite headstone to be placed there. The inscription reads, "Our first child who lies here unnamed but never forgotten." That phrase, "never forgotten," captures something essential about Richard and Joan's marriage. The tragedy didn't break them. It forged them into something unbreakable. Every success that followed, every adventure, every empire built, it all rested on a foundation of shared grief that only they truly understood. And Joan carried that grief silently, privately, for the rest of her life. Here's what makes Joan Templeman's story so remarkable. In 50 years beside one of the world's most famous entrepreneurs, she never gave a single interview, not one. While Richard courted cameras, crossed oceans in hot air balloons, and posed for magazine covers, Joan stayed invisible. She raised their children. She managed their home, and according to everyone who knew them, she quietly shaped decisions that built a global empire. Richard has always been open about her influence. That Danish bacon sign he bought from her antique shop, the one that read, "Now that's what I call music," became the inspiration for one of the most successful compilation album series in history. A throwaway purchase to impress a girl became a billion-dollar brand. Even the creation of Virgin Atlantic traces back to Joan. In 1984, Richard was flying to the British Virgin Islands to see her when his flight was suddenly canceled. Stranded and frustrated, he chartered a private plane, filled it with other bumped passengers, and charged them each a fare to cover costs. A passenger told him afterward, "Virgin Airways isn't too bad. Smarten up the service and you could be in business." That canceled flight sparked an airline, and at the center of it was a man desperate to get home to the woman he loved. Through the years that followed, Joan remained Richard's anchor during every storm. When British Airways launched their infamous Dirty Tricks campaign against Virgin Atlantic in the early 1990s, hacking computers, poaching passengers, planting negative stories, insiders say Joan's steady counsel helped Richard navigate the crisis without losing his composure. The lawsuit ended with British Airways paying damages and legal fees, totaling over £3 million. Then came the physical disasters that tested them in different ways. In August 2011, lightning struck Necker Island's Great House during a tropical storm. The fire spread so fast that guests had just 15 minutes to escape. Kate Winslet, who was staying in the house, famously carried Richard's elderly mother Eve to safety. Richard and Joan were in a nearby villa with their son Sam. They watched their home burn, losing 30 years of photographs and irreplaceable memories. "My office was based in the house, and I have lost thousands of photographs, and my notebooks, which is very sad." Richard wrote, "But all family and friends are well, which in the end is all that really matters." They rebuilt. They always rebuilt. 6 years later, Hurricane Irma, one of the strongest Atlantic hurricanes ever recorded, made direct landfall on the British Virgin Islands. Richard, Joan, and their staff sheltered in a wine cellar as devastating winds battered Necker Island, flattening nearly every structure. 5 people died across the British Virgin Islands during the storm. The Branson family survived, and when the COVID pandemic threatened to destroy Virgin Atlantic in 2020, Richard made headlines by offering Necker Island itself as collateral for a government loan. Critics attacked him for living offshore while seeking bailouts. His response was direct. Joan and I did not leave Britain for tax reasons, but for our love of the beautiful British Virgin Islands, and in particular Necker Island. Through fires, hurricanes, billion-dollar lawsuits, and global pandemics, Joan was always there, not in front of cameras, not giving statements, just present, steady, and unshakable. As Richard wrote in one of his many tributes to her, "She is a very private person who has always stood by me mentally, emotionally, and spiritually." As the saying goes, behind every man there's a great woman. In July 2025, the Branson family gathered at Kasbah Tamadat in Morocco to celebrate Joanne's 80th birthday. It was everything she would have wanted: intimate, joyful, surrounded by the people she loved most. Richard posted a tribute that now reads like a farewell he didn't know he was writing. "Thank you for being by my side through it all," he wrote. "The highs, the lows, and all those quiet, content, and peaceful moments in between. I love you more and more each year." In the weeks that followed, Richard's Instagram became a gallery of gratitude, photos of Joan smiling, dressed for evenings out, champagne in hand. Just days before her death, he shared an image of himself kissing her head with the caption, "Everyone needs a Joan in their life. Behind every man, there's a great woman." Then came November. Richard was in India participating in the Strive Challenge, a charity cycling event. Near the Taj Mahal, he fell off his bike and injured his shoulder. He flew 4,000 miles back to England for treatment, and fate intervened in a way he never could have predicted. Joan was already in a London hospital, recovering from a back injury. When Richard arrived for his own treatment, he was placed in a room just down the corridor from her. After 50 years together, they found themselves as hospital neighbors, laughing at the absurdity of it all. "We laughed together about how typical it was of us to end up on the same floor," Richard wrote, like love-struck teenagers delighted to find each other again. They shared a final lunch that day. Joan was in positive spirits, growing stronger, smiling that radiant smile Richard had fallen in love with half a century ago at the Manor recording studio. Then suddenly, without warning, she was gone, quickly, painlessly, with Richard right beside her. "It brings us all great comfort to know we were together," he wrote. Their son Sam posted his own tribute hours later. "Mom, you instantly made everyone in your presence feel like all was well with the world. You were the kindest, most loving, warm, and abundantly generous woman to walk this earth. I am so deeply grateful to have had the privilege of being your son and being able to call you Mum." The family gathered on Necker Island, the place Richard bought to impress Joan, where they married, where their children married, where 5 grandchildren have now created memories of their own. And perhaps the most telling detail of Joan's legacy came not from Instagram tributes, but from a document signed years earlier. Richard and Joan were among the signatories to the Giving Pledge, committing to donate the majority of their wealth to charitable causes. In their joint letter, they wrote words that now feel prophetic. "Stuff really is not what brings happiness. Family, friends, good health, and the satisfaction that comes from making a positive difference are what really matters." Joan Templeman understood that truth her entire life. She never chased fame, never sought recognition, never needed the world to know her name. She had something far more valuable: a family that orbited around her quiet strength, and a partner who knew exactly what he had. So what do we take from the life of Joan Templeman Branson? 50 years of marriage, 3 children, 1 lost too soon, 2 who carry her legacy forward, 5 grandchildren who called her Granny Joan, a private island that began as a romantic gesture and became a family sanctuary, and a global empire built by a man who credits her as the reason any of it was possible. She survived the death of her firstborn daughter. She survived fires that destroyed her home. She survived hurricanes that flattened everything around her. She survived business crises that would have broken lesser partnerships. And through all of it, she never once stepped into the spotlight her husband occupied so naturally. Joan Templeman was the woman behind the curtain, the steady hand, the voice of reason, the anchor that kept Richard Branson grounded while he reached for the stars. Richard's final tribute captured it perfectly. "Joan was my everything," he wrote, "the shining star around which our family's universe has always orbited. That light is not gone, it's just taken on a new shape, It will guide us forward, and we will carry her with us, always. Think about what that means. A man who flew to space, who crossed oceans in balloons, who built companies that changed industries, and the center of his universe was a down-to-earth Scottish woman who worked in an antique shop and never wanted her picture in the papers. The lesson isn't about business or billions. It's about what actually matters when everything else falls away. Joan knew the answer all along. Family, love, showing up, being present through the highs, the lows, and all those quiet moments in between. Richard Branson conquered nearly everything a human being can conquer, but in the end, the only conquest that mattered was winning the heart of a woman who saw through all the flash and loved the dreamer underneath. Holly, Sam and I are all together now, Richard wrote, doing our best to smile through the tears and to focus on all the good things Joan brought into our world. 50 years, one love, a legacy that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with showing up for the people who matter most. That's what Joan Templeman Branson built, and that's what Richard Branson just lost. Rest in peace, Joan. The world may not have known you, but the man who knew you best says you were everything.